Let us quiet our minds and our words as we prepare to be together in this space. Welcome. Spirit of life, be present with us in this hour. Join us today as we gather in a wider search for truth and purpose. In this quest, may we greet one another with open hearts and minds. May we inspire each other to consider new questions and seek deeper meaning. And may we cultivate wisdom and compassion. Let all who enter this gathering room see a welcome face and hear a kind word, and find comfort in this open and beloved community. And may all that is done here and said here today be in the service of love and justice. And with that, good morning. My name is Carolyn Carr, and I am your worship associate for this morning. And I welcome you to this Sunday service of the Unitarian Universalists of New Braunfels, Texas. Welcome to you all, whether you are Zooming in, attending our service, or attending in person. We are a welcoming community and a progressive community of seekers who come from a wide range of religious and socioeconomic backgrounds. We seek to share a journey of spiritual growth together while respecting the individual's right to freedom of belief. We are a shared ministry, which means that on any given Sunday, our pulpit may be filled with either our wise minister, Reverend Ade Kriba, or by speakers from the community or our congregation. And this presents each of you as a listener with a wide range of subjects and differing points of view. Unitarian Universalists look at the flaming chalice as a symbol of faith in the ongoing search for truth and knowledge. And with others, we light our chalice as a symbol of the hope for peace. Our one voice can bring truth, and one friend can bring courage. One hand can support the weary, and one idea can change humankind. One candle can light a dark corner. As the light of our chalice is added to the light from the candles in places of worship around the world, and light adds to light, so we may look to a brighter tomorrow, to a tomorrow where the light of peace shall return to every land and every people. May our friendship here extend even as the light from our chalice grows. This morning, we are very happy to welcome Reverend Frank Dietz and his wife, Karen Pantermuehl, as a Legacy Area Ranch family. They have been venturing together formally for 59 years this August, and friends for 65. Frank says that he has been a resident much of this third trimester since 2005 here in Comal County, where in an Oakmont, Karen helped design with young professionals their contemporary barn. They try to live a gentle footprint, and in the season of the pandemic have been served well by pasture and wildlife neighbors. Frank is an ordained pastor and teacher of the United Church of Christ, serving parishes in Chicago, Texas, Kansas, and always along rivers and streams. He is a native of New Orleans, Louisiana, growing up in the uptown part of that city a few blocks from the mighty Mississippi Levee. For nearly 14 years, Frank was asked or challenged to serve as the executive director of the Texas Conference of Churches, That's a partnership of Anglican, Orthodox, Jewish, Protestant, Quaker, and Roman Catholics, 52 groups in all. He has described himself as an ecumenical and interfaith gopher for a wide variety of chiefs who had in their constituencies some very passionate folks for justice. In recent years, Karen and Frank have been members of the Faith United Church of Christ. They were early signers on for CASE, the Citizens Alliance for Smart Expansion, and more recently, the Comal County Conservation Alliance, CCCA. By the way, the Conservation Alliance will be the recipient of our Share the Plate offering this morning and all of April. On a more personal level, Karen and Frank have 2 sons, 6 grandchildren, and have recently been elevated to greatness by a great-granddaughter. A lively bunch, indeed. Reverend Dietz shares with us now 5 questions from Wendell Berry's poetry, focusing on reflections this morning for the service. Question 1. How much poison are you willing to eat for the success of free market and global trade? Please name your preferred poison. For the sake of goodness, how much evil are you willing to do? Fill in the blanks with the names of your favorite evil and acts of hatred. Number 3, what sacrifices are you prepared to make for culture and civilization? Please list the monument, shrines, and works of art you would most willingly destroy. Number 4, in the name of patriotism and the flag, how much of your beloved land are you willing and prepared to desecrate? List in the following spaces the mountains, rivers, towns, and farms you would most readily do without. And number 5, state briefly the ideas, ideals, or hopes, the energy sources, the kinds of security for which you would kill a child. Name, please, the children you would most be willing to kill. And now, Reverend Dietz, the whole of it, us, and so much more.
Good morning, friends. It's a pleasure to be with some who are old friends, more recent friends, and some of you who become friends today. We are very mindful, as Karen and I are members at Faith Church over on Common Street, that we have an essential kinship in your early years of weekly regular gatherings there. And because I was on the city's watershed advisory committee after the violent flood of 2008, I got to tour this and many other neighborhoods that were so impacted by the raging waters, and wondered, when I realized where you were relocating, how this piece of property would be liberated and consecrated set aside to use for such noble purposes as you find it possible to have your gatherings here and have surrounded yourselves increasingly with what I suspect is the guiding hand of Dwight, and as well as a few others, in terms of the loveliness that this setting now provides. So it's a real privilege to be here. I say to you, in a deep sense of affection and solidarity with you and with the many, shalom. That Hebrew greeting far exceeds the language capacity of almost any other term that I know to embrace the whole of what we experience as life in all its fullness and wholeness. Yes, shalom to you and shalom to all. There are other words in other languages, but none so fitting as shalom. The framework that I want you to be mindful of in this reflection is provided by a disparate number of deep and helpful minds. Essential among them, Paul Tillich, the Christian, but much more than Christian theologian, Teilhard de Chardin, an humble and most unlikely ordered priest of the Roman Catholic tradition. The poet Wendell Berry, whose questions appear in his publication Leavings, published in 2010, but I think probably his question poem written after 2000. And so many historic and contemporary poets. The list is nearly endless and may include some of you. Tillich, in the center of what he speaks of, is best summed up in his small publication, Eternal Now. The sense that in the broadest way possible, all of life, all that we experience, all that we imagine, in one way or another, is encompassed in this sense of what I call the holy thou, God of many names, and beyond the names and the descriptions that we might provide. No doubt you found Wendell's questions startlingly harsh, but indeed appropriate. They almost sounded like they were written this week rather than some years ago. Wendell's questions remind me of the hard, harsh words of some of the Hebrew prophets when, in passionate indignation, they spoke words of challenge and indictment. And in the Hebrew poetry framework of much of that scripture, act in a prosecutorial manner to put that before the people in terms of look at your unexamined behaviors and the consequences of those behaviors. My sense of the whole of it, of my participation in the whole of it, goes way back to the 1940s on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. A mile or more back from the waters to be protected from the many tropical systems that came periodically, but with a screen porch. And our grandfather Dietz provided that screen porch where we grandkids often were privileged to spend our nights. And I began as a young boy to discover the melodies of the nearby frogs of a pond, the crickets and the cicadas and their charming and sometimes shrill vocals, the whippoorwill, and so much more. But it was a time then, too, to awaken to the early rising of the rooster in the hen house and to the many, many greeters in the trees of the morning as dawn broke. That sense of wonder and connectivity and participation rooted me in something that has stayed with me, not just nostalgically, but in deep curiosity through many, many years. Fast forward now with me about 75 years, and our wooded strips on the ranch where I live over near Green, the wooded strips through which I get to walk when I go to get the papers in the morning or take the trash or gather the mail later in the day, undisturbed, not groomed and combed like some of our German hosts, as I saw them in Germany, but rather left to be themselves, to cycle themselves, and to demonstrate all of the ways in which the ecosystem and biosystems work. Some of my favorite times have been taking little toddler grands and nephews and nieces on discovery walks through those woods. And we would examine the micros, and we would look at the somewhat macro as well, and wonder together. My walks daily, particularly this season of the year, give me the treat of micro yellow and gold blooms, some of which Karen tells me are the villain source for some burrs that come later, as well as shades of purple and lavender. Teeny tiny little expressions of what's to come. And then when I'm not assaulted by oak pollen, I'm able to take in the remarkable aromas of the open space and the blooms of the season as they converge and offer all kinds of vivid stimulation. My walks, particularly with one of the grands, fascinated in his early life by the dung beetle that he called poop beetles. And he said to me, Grandpa Hub, you know, it's really, really wonderful that we are provided with these beetles that take care, or it would be a very smelly walk we would be taking. And I said, yes, in this pasture where goats and cattle come and go, you're certainly right. Years ago, in the 1980s, we were participants in a small United Church of Christ congregation in Austin while I was flitting about across the state in my ecumenical endeavors. And as you heard me describe gophering. I was home and able to be at worship with my family on a given Sunday when a French astronomer who taught alternately at the University of Texas and was often hanging out at McDonnell Observatory and the University of Paris the other semester every year, was also a trained opera singer. And on that morning, at that congregation, we shared joys and concerns as worship opened, rather than as you do at the conclusion. He leapt to his feet, as I recall, and began singing in an operatic voice, the top of his decibels, one of the Psalms about the magnificence of God's earth. And I was startled, but I found in just hearing him, my heart began to pound. Soon thereafter, he explained that he had to open his joy with his celebration of song and psalm, because the night before, the Hubble telescope had been launched, and he had something to do with that. And he said, you will be hearing from the Hubble and seeing from the Hubble for years to come. Now, far beyond its prediction, the Hubble, again this last week or 10 days, has given us yet another, farther than we have ever reached to see or perceive than before, a new planet. And that's while we wait for the gifts of what will be called the images from the Webb, the new telescope, farther out, reaching into the far, far reaches of what I call the macro, the ultimate of the macro. There is something very personal when one stops to get a sense of what the poets know well and lift up in imaginative and powerful words and descriptions, and some artists are able to interpret in their incredible gifted work. It's marvelous to sense that what we as participants experience in some small little piece of it all, micro, there is in the macro so much that we do not know and are yet to discover, and are for others to see and know as generations unfold. I have been heartened in recent years, in this our third trimester or fourth quarter now, by what I have seen as a passion that cuts across the demographics and the attitudes of much of our population. It is most heartening to me that in our Texas Hill Country, and even in rock solid, resistant Comal County, there are those with a passion for justice for Mother Earth, for care about the water that we draw and that we send off, for care about the quality of the air we breathe and have accessible to us, and the space that still holds the cradles for wildlife and discovery for the future. There are varieties of such groups that have begun to gather, most of them centered not here in Comal, but across the Hill Country, and of course connecting not just nationally, but globally as well. Many of us spend some of the time reiterating in our own words and our own thoughts and our own anger and dismay the kinds of harsh, hard questions that Wendell Berry raised in his poem that was read to us today. But we also see, in a hopeful sense, the passions of others who begin to converge in a constructive way to say, we're going to do it differently now and more responsibly now. And one of those is your special offering of the month, Comal County Conservation Alliance. And I'll not describe all that in any detail for you because it's copiously described on the website. But I thank you for your good efforts and your gifts that are to come. And I thank you for not just your transformation and care of your own special space, and you do it better than most any of the other gathered communities of faith and faithfulness around the New Braunfels area and town. I thank you for that. And I thank you for the opportunity to share with you in this special way. I want to close. Originally, I was going to read something from a fellow named John Haynes, whom I got acquainted with in his 20 years or so as a hermit of sorts, but a poet and journalist as well up in Alaska. But one of my grandnephews is deep into his stuff right now, and so my shelf is bare. But this, again, coming back to Wendell Berry. And the world cannot be discovered by a journey of miles, no matter how long, but only by a spiritual journey, a journey of 1 inch, very arduous and humbling and joyful, by which we arrive at the ground of our feet and we learn to be at home. Let's be at home, where we are planted, where we are allowed to sojourn for this time, and let's do something about it as we set aside some of the sacred spaces, some of the green spaces left, and honor what all this gift is about. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
I extinguish this chalice, but our commitment to each other and this community remains. Together, may we walk the path of justice, speak the words of love, live the selfless deed, trod gently upon the earth, and fill the world with compassion until we meet again. So be it.